At exactly 6:47 a.m., three Sukhoi Su-34 fighter bombers sat parked on the tarmac at Engels-2 Air Base, their wings still warm from missions flown just 11 hours earlier over Ukrainian positions 450 miles to the southwest. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as ground crews moved between the aircraft with fuel trucks and weapons carts. Each aircraft was worth $36 million and capable of carrying 17,600 pounds of precision-guided munitions to targets across Eastern Europe. The base, located 730 kilometers deep inside Russian territory near the city of Saratov, housed Russia's strategic bomber fleet. 32 aircraft, including Tu-95MS Bear bombers and Tu-160 Blackjack supersonic strategic bombers, the latter valued at $163 million each. Overhead, two Pantsir S-1 air defense systems maintained watch, their radar dishes rotating every 4.5 seconds, scanning the sky for threats within their 20-kilometer engagement range. The base commander, reviewing flight schedules in the operations center 800 meters from the flight line, had every reason to feel secure. Engels-2 was protected by overlapping radar coverage, quick-reaction alert fighters on 5-minute standby, and the simple fact that no Ukrainian weapon system in the known inventory could reach this far into Russian territory. But 87 kilometers to the southwest, 6 objects were crossing the Volga River at an altitude of exactly 164 feet, flying in a loose formation that made them nearly invisible to ground-based radar. The Ukrainian drones had launched 4 hours and 22 minutes earlier. They were Tu-141 Strysh reconnaissance drones, Soviet-era aircraft built in 1979 and pulled from storage facilities where they'd sat mothballed for 31 years. Each drone measured 46 feet in length with a wingspan of 12.5 feet and weighed 3,850 pounds at takeoff. Originally designed to photograph enemy positions and return to base, Ukrainian engineers had stripped out the camera equipment and replaced it with a payload that transformed the Strysh from an observation platform into a precision strike weapon. Each drone now carried 88 pounds of military-grade explosive packed around a shaped charge warhead, configured to penetrate reinforced aircraft shelters and fuel storage tanks. The Strysh's turbofan engine, generating 4,400 pounds of thrust, pushed the drone to a cruising speed of 621 miles per hour at low altitude. Ukrainian planners had selected the flight path with obsessive care, a route that exploited gaps in Russian radar coverage, flying below 200 feet to stay under detection thresholds, following river valleys and terrain features that masked their radar signature. The navigation system had been programmed with 14 waypoints, each one verified against satellite imagery taken 72 hours earlier. Total flight distance, 540 miles. Fuel capacity, enough for 560 miles with a 20-mile safety margin. The mission had one objective: destroy Russia's ability to launch long-range strikes from Engels-2. At 6:54 a.m., the lead Strysh crossed the final waypoint 23 kilometers from the airfield. The drone's guidance system switched from GPS navigation to terrain-following mode, using a radar altimeter to maintain exactly 150 feet above ground level. Speed, 594 miles per hour. The second and third drones followed 40 seconds behind, spread 800 meters apart to complicate defensive targeting if they were detected. The fourth, fifth, and sixth drones trailed another minute back, programmed to strike only if the first wave succeeded in destroying the Pantsir S-1 systems. This was the critical calculation. Russian air defenses were lethal, but they required time to identify, track, and engage fast-moving, low-altitude targets. The Pantsir S-1 system could theoretically engage targets flying as low as 50 feet, but its radar struggled with ground clutter when tracking objects below 200 feet at high speed. Ukrainian intelligence estimated the Pantsir crews would need between 18 and 25 seconds from initial detection to firing solution. At 594 miles per hour, the Strysh drones would cover 23 kilometers in exactly 87 seconds. The Russian radar operators detected the first anomaly at 6:55 a.m. A radar return, small and intermittent, appeared on the display 19 kilometers southwest of the base. The operator, a 24-year-old conscript on his third month of duty, tagged it as a possible contact and elevated the alert to his supervisor. Standard procedure required visual confirmation before activating the Panzer systems. False alarms from birds, weather phenomena, and civilian aircraft were common, and each missile fired cost $65,000. The supervisor studied the radar track, speed 600 miles per hour, altitude 150 feet, bearing direct toward Engels-2. He reached for the alert klaxon at 6:55. The Panzer S-1 crews stationed in revetments 400 meters from the flight line received the activation order and began powering up their systems. The radar required 12 seconds to reach full operational capability. The fire control computer needed another 6 seconds to establish a firing solution. The missiles, 57 E-6 radar-guided projectiles with a range of 20 kilometers, would take 15 seconds to reach a target 8 kilometers away. But the drones were now just 11 kilometers out, closing at 871 feet per second. The first Panzer S-1 achieved radar lock at 6:56, distance to target 9.2 kilometers. The system's computer calculated intercept probability at 76% and recommended immediate engagement. The operator pressed the firing button. Two 57 E-6 missiles launched from their tubes with a roar that echoed across the base, their solid rocket motors accelerating them to Mach 3.5 in 2.8 seconds. The missiles, each weighing 187 pounds and guided by active radar seekers, tracked toward the lead Streich with precision. But the Ukrainian engineers had anticipated this moment. The Streich, unlike modern cruise missiles, had no defensive countermeasures, no radar warning receivers, no ability to evade. It simply flew straight, low, and fast. The first Panzer missile detonated 8 feet behind the drone, its proximity fuse triggered by the Streich's radar signature. Shrapnel peppered the drone's tail section, severing hydraulic lines and damaging the control surfaces. The Streich began losing altitude, dropping from 150 feet to 120, then 90, then 60. But it was still flying, and it was now just 4.1 kilometers from the target. The second and third Streich drones entered the engagement zone at 6:56. The Panzer S-1 crews, having expended 2 missiles on the first target, were reloading when the radar operator screamed into his headset, "Multiple contacts! 2 more, bearing 225, range 7 kilometers." The second Panzer system, positioned on the opposite side of the airfield, swiveled its radar dish toward the new contacts and achieved lock in 4 seconds. But now the geometry had changed. With 2 drones approaching from slightly different angles, the air defense systems faced a mathematical problem. They could engage one drone with high probability of kill or split their fire between both targets with reduced effectiveness. The commander made the call: concentrate fire on the closest threat. 2 more missiles launched, targeting the second Streich at a range of 5.8 kilometers. The missiles covered the distance in 11 seconds. The second Streich, unlike the first, took a direct hit. The 57 E-6's 44-pound fragmentation warhead detonated on contact, shearing off the drone's left wing and sending it spiraling into a wheat field 2.3 kilometers from the base, where it exploded in a fireball that lit up the morning sky. But the third Streich was now inside the Panzer's minimum engagement range. At distances below 1.2 kilometers, the 57 E-6 missile's guidance system loses effectiveness, unable to maneuver quickly enough to intercept fast-moving targets. The third Streich, screaming in at 594 miles per hour and just 80 feet above the ground, flashed over the perimeter fence at 6:56. Ground personnel scattered, diving behind concrete barriers and fuel trucks. The drone's navigation system executed its final command: a 6-degree climb to clear the hangar complex, followed by a terminal dive onto the primary target. The Streich nosed up, gained 40 feet of altitude, then rolled inverted and dropped toward a cluster of 3 Su-34 fighter bombers parked wing to wing on the southern apron. The drone struck the center aircraft at a 35-degree angle, its 88-pound warhead penetrating the Su-34's fuselage just behind the cockpit before detonating. The explosion, amplified by 8,800 pounds of jet fuel in the Su-34's internal tanks, created a blast wave that rippled outward at 23,000 feet per second. The center aircraft disintegrated instantly. The Su-34 to its left caught fire as shrapnel punctured its fuel tanks. The third aircraft's landing gear collapsed, and its wing crumpled inward as burning debris rained down across the tarmac. 3 aircraft, worth a combined $108 million, were destroyed or damaged beyond repair in 1.8 seconds. But the attack wasn't finished. The first Streiche, damaged by the Panzer missile but still airborne, had continued its approach at decreasing altitude. At 6:56 and 54 seconds, it cleared the hangars at just 35 feet, barely missing a fuel truck, and impacted directly into a hardened aircraft shelter housing a Tu-160 Blackjack bomber. The shelter, designed to withstand near misses from conventional bombs, had walls reinforced with 6 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. But the Streiche's shaped charge warhead, designed specifically for penetration, punched through the shelter's blast door and detonated inside the enclosed space. The overpressure wave contained by the concrete walls reflected back and forth inside the shelter like a steel drum, amplifying its destructive force. The Tu-160, Russia's most advanced strategic bomber, suffered catastrophic structural damage. Its airframe buckled, avionics system shattered, and both engines torn from their mounts. Even if the aircraft could be rebuilt, the cost would exceed the price of manufacturing a new bomber from scratch. The second wave of 3 Streiche drones monitoring the radio frequency for abort commands received none and continued their approach. At 6:57, they entered the engagement zone, but the Pantsir S-1 systems were in crisis mode. Magazines depleted, crews frantically reloading, and the command post struggling to coordinate defensive fires while simultaneously managing damage control operations across the burning flight line. The first drone of the second wave targeted a fuel storage depot 600 meters west of the main hangars. 4 above-ground tanks, each containing 50,000 gallons of JP-8 jet fuel worth $175,000 per tank. The Streiche struck the second tank at ground level, its warhead rupturing the tank's steel shell and igniting the fuel in a massive fireball that rose 300 feet into the air. The heat was so intense that it ignited the adjacent tanks within 40 seconds, creating a conflagration that burned for 11 hours and consumed over 180,000 gallons of fuel. The fifth Streiche targeted a cluster of support vehicles, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and ground power units parked in neat rows near the operations center. The explosion destroyed 14 vehicles and started secondary fires that spread to a nearby ammunition storage bunker. The sixth drone, programmed with the lowest priority target, struck the base's primary electrical substation, knocking out power to the entire facility and forcing the air defense systems onto backup generators. By 6:59 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after the first drone was detected, Engels-2 Air Base was effectively non-operational. 4 strategic bombers destroyed or damaged, 3 Su-34 fighter bombers eliminated, fuel reserves depleted, electrical infrastructure compromised. Total estimated damage, over $420 million. Ukrainian casualties, 0. Cost of the 6 Streiche drones, including modifications and warheads, approximately $680,000. The Russian military, accustomed to fighting wars where they controlled the initiative and struck targets deep inside enemy territory with impunity, now faced a stark reality. Their strategic depth, once considered an unassailable advantage, had evaporated. Ukrainian forces, using weapons that were in storage when the Soviet Union collapsed, had demonstrated they could reach any target in Russia's western military districts. In the weeks following the Engels-2 strike, Ukrainian intelligence documented the dispersal of Russian strategic bombers to air bases in Siberia and the Far East, adding 1,200 miles to their mission profiles and reducing their sortie rates by 40%. The pattern repeated: long-range Ukrainian strikes on ammunition depots in Bryansk, fuel storage in Belgorod, and command centers in Kursk. Each attack followed the same tactical model: exploitation of gaps in air defense coverage, use of low-cost weapons to target high-value assets, and timing optimized to maximize strategic disruption. The lesson was undeniable. In modern warfare, distance no longer provides security, and the side willing to innovate with obsolete weapons can defeat opponents who rely solely on technological superiority. The burning wreckage at Engels-2, still smoldering when satellite images were published 6 hours later, became a symbol of this new reality. That in the 21st century, no airbase is truly safe, no target is truly out of reach, and the most devastating attacks often come from the weapons your enemy isn't supposed to have.